This is my second novel. The first novel, Roberta's Woods, was published in 2008, and that takes place in Exeter, Rhode Island. And this book is set in Green Hill. And it's set in a real house, but I put it in a fictitious location. I put it right on the ocean. But the roots of this novel really go even farther back than that. When I was about 12 years old, maybe 14, my mother gave me some notebooks for Christmas. And over Christmas vacation, I was bored and I decided I would write a novel. And note to self, if you're going to write a novel, you might want to get a bigger notebook, right? This is not the exact notebook, but they were very much like this. I have a set of these. I couldn't find the one. But what was interesting about this little novel that I decided to write was, it was called The Vermonters. It was about this family in Vermont, and it was these 6 adult siblings, and I created this whole soap opera plot. I don't remember a lot about it, but there were a lot of intermarriages and adultery and all this stuff, because I love soap operas, and I was always, watching soap operas, so I created this really, crazy plot, and then I had more fun just naming the characters. So I don't think I ever did the actual writing. I think I just sort of came up with a title and maybe drew little sketches what the people looked like, and I had, the title, The Vermonters, written out all fancy. And I don't know if I was thinking about that family when I came up with the names for these characters, but at some point I said to myself, wow, years ago, 1971 or 2, whenever I came up with that whole scenario in my head, little did I know that years later, when I was in my 40s writing novels, that I would actually use those characters for something. So there's pieces of my life and my imaginings in here, definitely. When I was going to write about this family, at first when you're writing a novel, you just have only really vague ideas of what it's going to be about. I had the setting first, I knew where it was going to be, but I didn't know who the characters were going to be. I had this idea that I wanted somebody who was going to be from away. I didn't want it to be told solely from the point of view of a native person. I wanted to get that sort of out of state, out of place kind of person in it. So, I created this family, and I was going to tell it from the point of view of the daughter, who was obviously a native. Her name was going to be Joyce Winter, which it is in the book. And, I knew I had to create some kind of crisis in the family. So in the very first chapter, which I'm not giving anything away, the father commits suicide. James Winter, he dies, and now the mother and the 18-year-old daughter Joyce and her brother Dale, who's in his early 20s, are kind of left with this mess, as you are when somebody dies suddenly. There's the farm, they don't have a lot of money, they have to pay the taxes. And of course, what's happening in 1978, late 70s, early 80s, huge pressure to develop property. So immediately, people are after her, the mother, Helen Winter, to sell some of the property because they see opportunity. But I decided to make Helen Winter not be a native. She is from away. She's from Cooperstown, New York. Originally, she married into this family. I didn't necessarily have any intention of writing the book from her point of view, but I wanted to get that perspective into it. So then I wrote a chapter about Joyce and, about the suicide and whatnot. And then, somebody at a writing group or somewhere gave me the input that, what about this Helen? What about her? So I wrote a chapter from her point of view, and it just took off from there. I realized it was really, in large measure, her book. And I think that in the same way that I was probably thinking about my father when I wrote Roberta's Woods, because there is a man in Roberta's Woods, Alton Wilcox, who is somewhat like my father, I think I was thinking about my mother and my relationship with her when I wrote this book. So I was interested in, Joyce, the daughter, 18, early 50s, Helen Winter, suddenly widowed, really kind of incapable of really dealing with that. What is she going to do? Is she going to work? She's got this property to take care of. She's very shy. The only thing she does for work is she writes this newspaper column once a week about flowers and fauna and gardening and the sea and things like that. But the two of them are totally, not necessarily estranged, but there's absolutely no communication there. The two of them really can't talk to each other. And once I started writing from both points of view, I began to understand their relationship a lot more. And it may be fair to say that I learned about my mother through writing this book. But Helen Winter is not necessarily my mother, because once you write a book, you create a character, the demands of the plot are such that you really have to make the character fit the plot that you've created. So in many ways, Helen is nothing like my mother. But an essential emotional truth of what this woman is like, I think I was definitely drawing on my knowledge of her. And I think through writing it, I probably learned a lot more about it. And, you know, sadly, my mother passed away in March, right around the time I decided to make this into a book, you know, to publish it as an ebook and as a print edition. And it is dedicated to her, largely for that reason, because a lot of my relationship with her and the emotional truths of that is in the book. But I don't want people reading it thinking that she literally had these experiences. I mean, what you try to do is you try to filter through the emotions of the experiences to get at something, a higher truth. In the book, Helen, you know, she has the 2 children, but she had an earlier daughter who died. She drowned in a pond when she was 4, and I had a sister who died when she was 19. So, you know, there's no parallel there in terms of the literal thing that happened to that child or the age of the child, but certainly I was mining the emotional truth of, I know what my mother went through now to some extent. Writing about, you know, the death of a child, which is probably the worst thing anybody can go through. So, you know, exploring that experience through this character helped me to understand a little bit better what my mother went through.